So in terms of ARM, this is a very interesting one. This is one of my larger positions. And I did take a position in this in an early spot, and I'll go through that from a technical perspective. But I want to give you a little bit of background on ARM, why it caught my interest. So it did IPO in September, but if you look way back, ARM used to be publicly traded, and it was taken private back in 2016 by SoftBank. And so it came out again in September, which is interesting. And so it's a more mature company, and it had liquidity right at the beginning. And that's something we look at in our Lifecycle Trade book. We mentioned that about IPOs looking for names that have over at least 20 million average daily dollars traded. And ARM is much larger than that. I think it's trading something 400 plus million on average a day. So that catches my attention. Also, early on, this name had some high quality funds that have positions. So that's interesting as well. And I'm always looking for themes. And, a year ago, I was talking about artificial intelligence as a theme that I was very interested in and monitoring. And I think that's going to be a multi-year theme. And so ARM is in that space. And so that makes it more interesting to me as well, because semis are projected to be big winners in this new AI supercycle that may be starting. So that also gets my attention in terms of ARM holdings. And like I mentioned, I do like trading IPOs in the early phase. So one thing I do look for, these names are very, very volatile. So I do look for early entry points, and I'll go through kind of where my core position is. Right. In terms of customers, ARM has all the big heavyweight semi customers. They also have Apple, Google, Amazon. So a very broad customer base, some big heavyweights. They make their money from licensing their technology, and they also make royalties off of the companies that use their IP technology in their chips. So one thing that catches my attention, I'm always looking for revenue growth. While they're slowing a bit on the smartphone side, their licensing revenue jumped, over 100% last time they reported. So that catches my attention. Their CEO, I'm always looking at the CEOs as well. What's their background? And Renee Haas has like 7 years at NVIDIA prior to joining ARM Holdings. And another interesting nugget is that NVIDIA at one point wanted to buy ARM Holdings. So think of it, NVIDIA is like the AI heavyweight, right, in the semi space. And just the fact that you have that kind of sponsorship where they wanted to buy ARM, ultimately, the regulators did not approve that, so that did not go through. And NVIDIA is also a customer of ARM. So just a little bit of background of why this name gets my attention. In terms of technicals, I did get in November. What I look for on the IPO, when it's a recent IPO, I'm looking for what we've dubbed like a hook pattern. It's really a U-shaped pattern. I'm trying to get in earlier. A lot of times I'll get stopped out, and I did get stopped out initially, but now I'm holding a position. Let's see, I looked up. Okay, so November 15th is my core position. And that's kind of like it's a hook, and it's trying to move out of a U-shaped short pattern. But finally, this name completed a actual base. So that's kind of unusual, because when an IPO base is usually much shorter. But if you look, ultimately ARM completed a full cup and handle, in my opinion, and it's pretty classic as well. I don't usually try to add. I did add a little bit in that handle area. So those are the positions I'm currently managing. And I did take, because we're in that early phase and it's unclear, are we going to go straight into an institutional advanced phase, which is something that Google did in the past? Very unusual, very rare. I don't know if it's going to do that. Or is it just going to, peter out pretty quickly after an initial advance? I don't know. So I typically take some of the position off into strength. I have done that. And now I'm managing the core. And the core, you asked before, Allie, about my favorite rules. What I'm using on this one is a modified ascender rule. So I'm going to be watching it around the 21-day EMA. I'm going to be watching it around the 50-day. If it can't hold those levels, I'll be taking parts of those positions off. And then I'm going to try to hold a small piece of the core for a longer term move if the stock continues to act well technically.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think another great thing about your approach is that aligns with what we do too, is that you're not having to make all or nothing decisions. Right. So you tried it once, you got stopped, got back in, added some, took some into strength, and now you're using these different rules to keep you in. So
yes. And I always like to share, especially in this phase, getting stopped out is the norm for me. I know some newer traders may not understand that and feel like, oh, I've made a mistake. But I go in thinking I'm going to get stopped out, especially in this phase, because it's so volatile.
Right.
That's why I'm trying to get an early entry, trying not to add at any obvious points because the volatility is high. And then I'm going to size the position smaller than a mature name, because otherwise I know I won't be able to hold on. Too much volatility in the name. And I think I looked up, initial buy November 3rd, where I thought it was turning. That was almost round tripped out. So, on that one, I got lucky. I wasn't, I didn't lose money, but you could see how easy it is to get stopped out.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like that's a really great mindset tip there, to go in knowing that it could go wrong. And I feel like also once you have a good position, you're probably also thinking, because you know how volatile it is, okay, well, it could give it back here. And, and what am I going to do? Right.
Yes. And you can see how it acted on earnings too, not very well. If someone tried to hold through that, that would be hard. It doesn't look that drastic here, but this stock can move very easily, 3, 5, 6, 7%. So it's volatile, even though it has that liquidity.
Right. And so then what about add-on points? Do you feel like it needs to settle down here a little bit more, or form a new base before you would add again? Or if it does look like it's getting support at the 50-day or 10-week line, would you be adding to something like this?
I would be tempted with this one. Now, typically I would not because it's in that early phase. But there are some differences here, as I described. I usually try not to. What I found is my ads usually, it's very difficult to time a buy, right, with tight stops. So I find I'm stopped out quite often on early stage names on ads. So I'm going to try to avoid that. I did do a little bit in the handle. I have a good cost basis now. I'm going to try not to mess that up. So I'm going to probably just be sitting here and seeing how it acts.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, a great IPO case study there.
Hey, Allie,
Go
really
ahead.
quick, if I may, someone
Yeah.
asked in the Q&A about what phase is this in? Is it the institutional advanced phase or the IPO advanced phase? So I think it would be good to just address that really quickly. We actually pulled each other.
Right.
Our other co-authors, Eric Kroll and Kurt Dale, did we think it was an IPO advanced phase or an IPO institutional advanced phase? And we actually got mixed results. And this is where the chart reading is an art, right? And Eve, I think, touched on it really well, speaking to the fact that this is already a mature base and it did not have an IPO base. So from my perspective, if I treat this base as the first mature base, then this could be the start of the institutional advanced phase. But it's still early and it could still fail and go into a due diligence phase, in which case then I would go back in time and say, well, no, actually it was an IPO advanced phase. But sometimes we don't know, right, until later what phase it is. So I think that's important to note. If this turns into a stair-stepper pattern, then clearly we can say later that this was an institutional advanced phase.
Yeah, and we never know. It's an
Interesting.
excellent point, Kath. Thanks for bringing that up. And we never know until hindsight, right? But this one is a little rare. One thing I want to mention, I mentioned a lot of positives. There's a negative looming out there on ARM. It has a huge lockup coming up in March. So that's something to keep a close eye on. How does the stock absorb that?
Right.
And I think it's March, but that's something that I always kind of keep in mind when I'm trading and monitor that date, put it on my calendar so I'm aware of it and watch the action in the stock closely. But Kathy mentioned stair stepper. In our book, Google is one of the examples of that. But those are very rare. So even though we're thinking, oh, it's possible, we know that watching the price action. The stock will tell us, and you're only able to know really in hindsight.
Right. Yeah. And here's a look at Google. And I know former IBD head market strategist Mike Webster, when he was doing his study of IPO stocks and base patterns, he termed this kind of the poster child for IPO bases, and definitely had a successful early run there.
Hey,
Okay,
Ali, could
go
I
ahead.
squeeze in some questions for the IPO sisters?
Yeah,
you
we
two
might have to,
definitely
fight
definitely
for
earned
who's
your
gonna ask
moniker.
the questions. No, I'm just kidding. Go
It's
ahead.
great. Yeah, Kathy
Yep.
and Eve are great. And Eve, I'm glad you touched upon the company itself with ARM and how, yes, it was pursued by NVIDIA. Do you think growth-wise in the future, ARM is also going to be acquisitive?
Oh, that's a good question. I hadn't really thought about that. That's possible, and with some newer names, and they're really getting into the AI space as well.
Right.
And because that's the start of a what could be an AI super cycle, I think it's a real possibility. But I hadn't really thought through like what names. There's going to be some new names that we haven't heard of at all.
Oh, for sure.
Coming to market down the road. So I think it's going to be very exciting. Eric Kroll put together some stats for us of IPOs over the last couple of years. And there haven't been that many. Like if we go back to like January of 2022, he calculated only 175 IPOs. So that's much lower than normal, but it's typical for a bear market. And so I think it's a lagging indicator, but as we enter this super cycle in AI, I think we'll see some real interesting and exciting new names coming to market. I mean, some of them are going to be funded by venture capitalists and won't actually go public until they're much larger. But I'm keeping an eye on that space, definitely.
Yeah, it's just, given their type of business, it seems like, just like you said, they're in a sweet spot, because if more startups go out and they need the advanced designs and chips, I mean, there are a few places like ARM that have it all right there.